At Chris Kaylor Holistic, we demonstrate real healing and real caring to your health issues and needs. Our solution for you is an alternative to the alternative. Our out-of-the-box treatment methods are aimed to your specific well-being and are quite different than most. Venturing down the realm of quantum energy healing, Chris uses unique modalities of healing, such as spiritual intervention with pendulum dowsing, sacred geometry tools such as the neutralization, divinity, and sun ring. Another tool Chris uses is a 5-tiered pyramid affectionately known as the Silver Light Pyramid to activate quantum activity within the body. Also, Chris Kaylor Holistic uses radionic technologies in various platforms with specific liquid mineral ionics to balance out excesses and deficiencies within the body. At Chris Kaylor Holistic, our goal is to get tangible and measurable results in the least amount of time possible so you can carry on with what's important in your life. Another advantage to this unique energy healing is that it can be done at a distance healing session. So location is not a barrier and can be done conveniently at your home, office, just about anywhere through Skype or telephone conferencing. Eliminate costly protocols, expensive monthly supplements, high-priced allopathic operations, invasive surgeries, and dubious medication applications that keep you trapped in a financial and health rat race. Get a specific, customized, out-of-the-box solution tailored for your health recovery. At Chris Kaylor Holistic, we are warm welcoming and want to put you at ease with your visit to us. Please visit www.chriskaylor.net for further information as we welcome your questions and inquiries to starting this unique journey. At Chris Kaylor Holistic, we want to show you that we are the alternative to the alternative and the out-of-the-box solution to customize an answer for you to spend less and gain more in your high vibrancy journey. Visit www.chriskaylor.net. Real healing and real caring to your health needs.
To the world, Mr. Chris Kaylor.
I am Chris Kaylor, coming to you live from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Bob, you paid the internet bill this week.
I did. What happened?
Last week was a bit of a wash, but stuff happens. You're working on the internet, on Skype.
Us and about 100 other servers went down.
Yeah, exactly.
It was nasty. What were you doing anyway? Eh?
I had internet all day long. I don't know, but yeah. We're going to Florida next week on vacation with the family. We're going to go to Disney World, and my beautiful mother-in-law asked nicely that please don't poke anybody about Trump while we're in the States. I says, don't worry, we're going to behave ourselves, for sure.
I'll wave when you pass over my house.
Okay, I'll wave to you.
No problem.
I'll drop you something.
Sure.
Now, a lot of things happening in the energy world. First of all, we do have a guest tonight. Eliezer Ben Joseph is going to be back on. We're going to be talking about live blood analysis, which is pretty interesting. Changes within the energy world. Now, we're learning a lot more on what's going on with humanity, or lack thereof, let's say. A lot of new knowledge and verification that our DNA consists of a few other species of ET. One being the Arcturians, and a lot of people are kind of upset with me about that, but that is what it is. We've been tricked. The Arcturians are not here to help us. For the most part, they're here to feed off of us. And what better way to do that than to make friends with us and then let them have a smorgasbord? So we've been clearing a lot of that DNA out of our DNA. The concept of ascension is to become pure human, to get rid of all of this ET species of DNA out of our DNA and become truly humans. That's what the whole concept is, really. I found a new clearing today. So if you're using my course, if you're using my dowsing system, using my tools, here's what it is. Now, sacred geometry is everywhere. It's basically the language of the universe, let's say. So the tools that I use, the pyramid and the rings, is all a form of sacred geometry. Now, within our body is sacred geometry. Everything has a geometric shape of its own within our body. So what I've been doing is asking the Lord of sacred geometry to restore all the sacred geometry within the person's body, within the client's body, before I start working with them. And there is energy moving. People are saying, hey, yes, something's happening, something's moving, I feel something going on. And that is another bigger clearing to get to the real problem. So we've been doing that. If you restore the geometry within the person's body, things tend to line up a little better, and it's a lot easier to assess and try and find the problem, and has been working fantastic. Another big one that's come up is the Norse god Hod, H-O-D. Hod is the blind god of winter, and he was tricked to kill his twin brother by throwing mistletoe at him, Bob. Mistletoe was the only thing that could kill his twin brother. So he's not very happy about that.
Wait a minute, hold on. You sure that wasn't my second wife?
So he's not too happy that he got tricked into doing that, so he's taking it out on humanity or something like that. I don't know. But all I know is I've been moving that energy out. The lightning bolt of Hod. If you remove the lightning bolt of Hod, again, it's another layer of energy to remove to really get to the problem. We've been going really deep into the DNA, making discoveries energy-wise and doing clearings and reconnections, and it is working very, very well. Finding a lot of holographic projections. So let's say you walk into the doctor's office and you smoke all your life, and the doctor says you're going to get lung cancer. Well, now that goes into your subconscious and starts to work, and it can create lung cancer through just by him saying those words. So that is in the form of a holographic projection that we can just shut off and move out, and then things can continue to get better. So again, another energy thing to move so that the body can start to heal itself and we can find the actual problem. So it's working really well. Tons and tons of good clearings every day now over here in wonderful Winnipeg. Students are doing fantastic. If you're trying to get onto my website and book an appointment right now, I'm booked to mid-September. If you want to get in quicker, you can always request by sending me an email to hook up with one of my students who are doing very well. I've got about 4 or 5 that are they're starting their own companies. They're doing their own thing, and it's working really, really well. Ty and Nora, Chris Fabish in New Zealand is doing fantastic. Nicola Kehoe is doing amazing. There's a lot of people who are really getting it on. Shao is really coming up. She is in LA, I think. So tonight, we're going to be talking about something different other than the energy stuff that we normally do. And it all ties together. The energy component of a health problem, the physical component of a health problem, they all tie into each other. And one of the things that I do in my office is live blood analysis. That's taking a little drop of blood out of your finger, putting it under a special type of microscope so you can see your blood cells and everything else within it on the screen in front of you, and then right away you can tell, does your blood look healthy? Does your body need a nutrient, or can you tell something is going on? So tonight we're going to be talking with Eliezer Ben Joseph. He's a board-certified traditional naturopath and numerously trained worldwide and holds 3 doctorates. He is the master herbalist, iridologist, certified RAYID Master, that's psychological assessment of the iris of the eye, and an instructor in Polarity Therapy and therapeutic bodywork. He also is a certified personal trainer, holistic health instructor, and has taught diet, nutrition, therapeutic bodywork, and personal development for over 25 years. Dr. Ben Joseph, also the host of a top-rated Natural Solutions Radio, a call-in radio show on KTSM 690 Talk Radio in El Paso, Texas for the past 18 years. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Eliezer Ben Joseph.
And good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. And now it's been 20 years on the radio.
20 years. Wow.
20 years on the radio. Is that cool? We love radio.
Wow.
And don't you enjoy doing it, talking to people and just answering questions online? It changes people's lives.
The whole concept of radio like this, especially internet radio, is that the alternative is here. You're not going to be hearing stuff like this on your local AM and FM radio stations. What you're doing is more in a scientific end, which is accepted. But if I was to talk about my stuff on the radio,
oh my God, they'd throw you off in a minute. They call that foo-foo stuff.
They would laugh me out of town.
Oh my God, it's so true. But yet, for those people that have the discernment to understand that there is higher frequency energies, that there are these knowledge that is much different than the traditional knowledge what people are being fed, whether it's on the radio or television or in schools. What you're talking about is so different, and it's few and far between, but of course you and I are very similar. We've been doing so much of the same things over our whole lives. So I think the whole internet, I'm fortunate is that I have a traditional radio show on Clear Channel Radio, and I stream because now Clear Channel streams, and I've been streaming my radio, so we stream. And my radio show is on Natural Solutions Radio, if I give a plug for my
Please
website.
do.
Yeah, that's Natural Solutions Radio. It's on every Saturday morning, Mountain Time from 8 to 10. And the website has about 2,000 hours of radio interviews, and I have about 38,000 published articles on the website. If it's on health, if it's on nutrition, herbs, vitamins, minerals, enzymes, diet, meditation, if it's on exercise, yoga, spiritual this or that, it's on my website if it's been in a reputable magazine. I don't quote from the Star, the Globe, or the National Enquirer, even though that's where everybody gets their information. So,
you mean the fake news?
yeah, now everybody and now you can't even tell. Oh my God, fake news is like going crazy. I mean, now what was that big CIA leak where, the CIA can go into somebody's computer, hack their phone or the computer and make like it came from somebody else. Mm-hmm. So is it the Russians that were hacking all the computers, or was it our own CIA? That's another whole subject.
Well, we don't have to answer that. We know the answer to that one.
They just got 3 Russians in Canada. They did. They really did.
And they
lives across the street from me.
Well, even what we're doing, live cell analysis, that's not looked at very. It's looked at as also part of foo-foo medicine. Yet medical microscopy has been going on for what? Over 150 years.
Ever since the magnifying glass, yeah.
The microscope, what was his name? Locke, who discovered the microscope way back. And so they've been looking at blood, and they look at water, and they look at all these things, and they've seen all this kind of stuff that's in the water or in blood or in plasma. And everything changed. Now, regular medical microscopy, that's used every day, but now machines do it. It's like when you send out a blood test, and that blood test might come back with what's called a differential, or a white blood cell differential, or it's called a CBC with a differential, a complete blood count with a differential. And what they'll do is they'll look, but it's a machine. And as an example, they're going to look at very base kinds of things. Again, they're going to look at, in a blood chemistry, you're going to look at the amount of red blood cells. Okay, you're going to look at maybe the shapes of those red blood cells. You're going to look at the white blood cells. And what they do is they count the white blood cells. They'll count 100 of them. And then in that 100, that's 100%, then they'll estimate what number of the 5 different kinds of white blood cells. So you have 5 white blood cells, and each white blood cell does a different thing. When you get a regular blood test, they're only looking at the quantity, not the quality of blood. So there's a very big difference at the number of red blood cells or how well they're moving. Or when you look at a white blood cell, there's a big difference between just counting how many neutrophils, which is one type of white blood cell that eats garbage, or how is that neutrophil moving? What's it look like inside the cell? Now, with the newest microscopes that we have, these microscopes are going up 10,000 diameters, and they're on a variable zoom lens cameras now. They have light field, they have dark field, they have phase contrast, they have cadescent. There's all kinds of ways. But now we're going up very high magnifications. Like my microscope is on a fiber optic lenses. and a video enhanced monitor. So when you look at it, I'm looking at blood about 10,000 diameters, where normal blood used to be looked at about 1,000 diameters. Okay, so a red blood cell is about 7.6 or 7 to, let's say 7 to 9 microns large, which that's just pretty small. That is like really teeny tiny.
Teeny tiny.
Really teeny tiny. And when you put it on a microscope and all of a sudden people see their blood on a microscope, it's overwhelming.
It is.
I've been doing medical microscopy since 1983, and I studied with Robert Bradford at the Bradford Institute, and I also studied with Philip Hoekstra, who was one of the foremost medical microscopists. He worked for Hemiview, and so I've studied with some of the best in the world. And I've been doing it in my office since 1983, and I've had like 4 microscopes now. They keep getting better. Now my video camera is a little teeny miniature, where it used to be, and weighed 20 pounds.
I'm using an Olympus BX40 microscope. It's a $1,000 unit, and I bought it for $2,000 about 5 years ago.
That's a good one. I have a top of the line Olympus. Also, mine was about $9,000. I got all the extras on it, and I like to have all the bells and the whistles, and it came with the video enhanced monitor. You got to have. Listen, we do it. It's my living, so you got to have the bells and the whistles.
It's the big toy. So what I like to use my microscope for, and I know you can get very intricate with these things, and not just anybody can fire one of these things up, put blood underneath, and tell what's going on. What I like to do with it, number one, is look for parasites in the blood.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, worm parasites, the leishmania, all the little creepy critters that are floating around in your blood. You can see those. You can see rod-form bacterias. And you can see, for the most part, everybody's got sticky blood. They got the ROLU going on in the blood. Now, what I like to do with it is somebody comes in, they feel really crappy with their health. They're not really much into the energy thing. We can leave that alone, and we can recommend some diet changes and maybe some supplements. And then a month later, after doing the change, you come back and look at your blood again and see if it looks healthy.
Absolutely. You were talking about the premier client tool, or let's say the single most important tool that a physician or doctor can use for patient compliance. When a client looks at their blood and then comes back a month later, either that blood is better, or they didn't do what I said, or I said the wrong thing. It's very rare that I say the wrong thing. It can happen, but it's very rare. So think of it. When someone sees that, you can't lie. Now, in regular medicine, they've used microscopy for years and years. The difference is when you and I look at things, we don't wait for a pathology to start up. Like, as an example, you were mentioning rod form bacteria, things like that's already getting to be a little advanced in their blood. If they're already showing things like that, then you're going, hey, man, you're not feeling so well. How I got into it about 35 years ago. Again, I've been doing it since 83 with the Bradford Institute. And I started looking, I went to a guy that did the live blood. And I couldn't believe it. They took a couple of slides, 2 little drops. One drop, they put a smear called a wet mount, a smear, which is the live blood under very high magnification, where you're looking at one cell at a time.
Okay.
And then the second smear they did wasn't a smear, it was called the dried layer, which is a ROTS test, reactive oxygen toxic species. And you would look at a dried blood smear, you would just touch that slide and you would make 5 progressive little drops that slowly get smaller. You would put those down and let those little drops dry. And that's a dry blood. And you would look at the geometrical pattern that is made, and the white little spots are called ROTS bodies, and that's reactive oxygen toxic species. So I was fascinated because it was, first of all, the simplicity of it, and you could directly see because he put it on the television monitor, and I'm able to look at the blood right as I was sitting there.
In real time.
In real time. And then the doctor moved the microscope, around. You have a little slide, and it can move up and down or side to side. And he would look at different areas of the slide. And then you could see white blood cells. You can see the different kinds of white blood cells. And when you went up in magnification, you could look at how those blood cells were moving inside. See, most of the time, the doctor only gets a quantity. Like we want, when I was saying about this differential, so you measure 100 cells. Well, about 60% of them should be what's called a neutrophil. And that is going to be the cells that eat garbage. Then about 30% of those cells should be what's called lymphocytes. And they go around and they tag things. They mark things for the phagocytes, for the neutrophils to eat. Then you have what's called a monocyte, which also cleans up debris. And you have an eosinophil, which is very different when you look under the microscope because it's very shiny, very bright and shiny. That only comes out with food allergies or parasites. So you only want maybe 1 or 2% of that, but most people you're seeing 5, 6, even 7%. The monocytes, which clean debris, you want about 7 to 10%, not much more. And then the last one is called a basophil, and that you usually see in intestinal allergies, in the small intestine, large intestine. So you can actually get a percentage. So as an example, we know that, let's say the neutrophils, which should be 60%, let's say it drops to 40%. And the lymphocytes, which should be 30, that goes up to 50%. We now know that that's a viral infection because when the lymphocytes go up and the neutrophils go down, it's viral. Now, if the opposite occurred, if the neutrophils, say, went up to 80% and the lymphocytes, say, went down to 10%, then we know it's a bacterial infection. So that's how doctors can tell virus or bacteria, as an example.
Now, somebody has asked, can the blood test detect cancer?
Well, you cannot see cancer. What you can detect is the remnant. So if someone's saying you have cancer, that's a fallacy. What you would see is the byproducts of severely compromised blood. In the wet smear, what you would see is the blood would be sticky. You would see a lot of debris that's in the blood. You would see the blood cells misshapen, and there's different shapes, and we can go over those. You would see also these long, what's called spicule formation, which is fibrin that elongates platelets, which would show a severe inflammatory condition. So by seeing the debris and the broken cells in the severe inflammatory condition, then when you look at the dry mount and you would see these large white open holes, and then with a very high magnification, you would go into those holes, those are called Rott's bodies, and you would look for what's called Heinz bodies. If you see, or when you see the Heinz bodies, then you would look like and know pretty much that there's cancer. If the Heinz bodies aren't there, there's some form of severe degeneration, but it might not be cancer. So you're able to look at the byproducts. And this is where it comes from what's called a pleomorphism or monomorphism. And that comes from the germ theory, or it comes from Anton Béchamp, which is the terrain. And here's the two theories. Louis Pasteur talked about the germ theory, and he found these little beasties in the blood. Looked in water, you look in blood, and the first thing we found is that blood is not sterile. All the doctors, up until just recently, thought that blood is sterile. Well, it's not. There's a war going on. There's a big war going on, and you can see the war actually happening before your eyes when the blood on the screen. So Anton Béchamp, which was in the 1800s, what he talked about is that these germs that Louis Pasteur talked about, Louis Pasteur said it is the germ that causes the disease, and that every disease of a specific type has to have the same germ. That's part of the Koch postulates. And the other is it's not the germ, it's the terrain that the germ lives in. So as an example, if you're eating healthy and the terrain, the soil that your blood lives in is healthy, then the germ cannot gain a foothold. But when the, let's say, blood gets sticky, the first thing we know is that it's not uptaking oxygen in the same way. So what happens is the electrical charge of the cells on the surface of the red blood cells, they're supposed
like a magnet.
Right. They're supposed to be the same electrical charge, so they repel each other. Now, when you look at a blood under a microscope, it's not round like a ball. They're flat like a life preserver, and they're indented. So you would look at these life preservers, and your red blood is actually that. It's a life preserver. It's the life-giving essence of your body. So because they're kind of flat, when their electrical charge changes and you get multiple positive and negative charges, now when the cells come close to each other, what happens, they begin to stick together. And now what happens, you get what you call this rouleau detection. And that's where the blood looks like a stack of coins. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they call it rouleau, which in French is a stack of coins.
Stack of coins, yeah. I remember I did a trade show in Winnipeg. I did live blood analysis for $5 a pop, and people lined up all day long to see their blood. 99% of everyone, their blood was rouleau. Yeah.
Now, here's the thing that you have to always be careful about, and I say this, with reservation, because depending upon where you look on the slide, you can always find a severe rouleau. And there are therapists that do trade shows that want to sell products.
Oh, yes.
And so they will go on a slide, and if you go to the edges of the slide, you put a cover slip on the slide so it's sealed, there's no oxygen, and then you'll see that there's a smear. And around the outside, that smear then seals the inside of that smear against the air. So around that smear will always be the blood stacked up because it's at the edges of the slide. So you have to be careful. And a couple times I've gone to trade shows and I can see that. And I would say, what happens if you move that slide more to the center of the slide? What does that show? Oh, yeah, and then they get very upset about that. So, it can be used maliciously. And that's why people need to be educated. And you go to somebody that's reputable that you know. Okay, but what happens is that because the blood gets sticky, when you're eating, that plasma, which is the water part of your blood, so you have these different things floating in your blood. And when they say blood, most people think red blood cells. But actually you have this plasma, which is the water part of your blood.
The carrier.
And the carrier. So it's got red blood cells, it has white blood cells, it has platelets, and it has all kinds of garbage and debris. Plus, it carries all the nutrition to the cell. And you have what's called extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. So the plasma is all of the fluid that's outside of your cells. Then you have the cell that's surrounded by a membrane, and inside that cell is another fluid, and that's called intracellular fluid. Now, in the plasma, the water part is oxygen is carried, and all the nutrition for the cells is carried in this water part of the blood. So it has to go to the cells, and it has to then get inside the cell. Now, in the cell, you have metabolic processes going on, and you have normal metabolic waste, uric acids and carbonic acids and lactic acids, and these things are just normal metabolism on a cellular level. But that now has to get into that water part of the blood and be excreted from the body. So that plasma has both the nutrition to get in the cell and the garbage that has to get out of the cell and then carried out of the body. And there's only 5 ways you can get rid of that garbage. You can poop it out, you can pee it out, you can sweat it out your skin, cough it out of your mouth, or blow it out of your nose. That's it. You're going to poop, pee, smell, cough, or blow. That's it. So it has to come out. Now, the membrane...
Better out than in, right? Better out than in?
Better out than in. Now, a lot of people don't realize is that most people have seen a commercial or some science show where you see blood going through the blood vessels, through the arteries. And that blood moves really fast. And you've seen it like in drug commercials where they show the blood cells going through. Well, most oxygen that gets to the tissue of your blood is carried in the plasma part of the blood. The red blood cells don't give up their oxygen until they get to the teeny tiny little capillaries, the smallest little blood vessels in your body. They are so small that red blood cells can only go through those capillaries in single file. So, and they're even smaller diameter than a red blood cell. So the red blood cell has to get squeezed into the shape of a hot dog as it goes through those capillaries. And because of more surface area, it releases the oxygen into the cells. So some of your cells get oxygen directly from the red blood cells, but most get it through the plasma.
Now, we got a question. Yeah. Somebody's asking if a blood examination can be done if they sent you their blood on a slide by mail.
Well, you can't do the live blood because by the time you get it, it's 2 or 3 days old. But you can do the dried blood because you're looking at the blood once it's dry, and that doesn't change the blood. Unless you let the slide sit for years and years, then it slowly degrades. I have slides going all the way back to 1983. I keep the slides. I used to keep every slide on every person. So we would have that as a record. And so you can do that, but the live cell you have to do because they take the blood out of your finger and they look at it live. So what you're doing is when you look at that and you look at that live blood, you can see what you called either the blood gets sticky because of this debris that's in the plasma part, and you get all these undigested food proteins. Like you've heard of leaky gut syndrome. Yeah, that's like almost epidemic nowadays. And that used to, it used to be looked at that was a fallacy, that, that you couldn't absorb these large proteins. Well, now we know that you can absorb these large proteins directly through the gut and into the bloodstream. And because they are, again, they change the electrical charges in the plasma, things start to get thick. And it's like, let's say someone doesn't drink enough water. Okay, then your blood is going to get thicker. You get dehydrated, and you can tell that. So you might see these cells all sticking together. Now, when that's a real condition, they're probably dehydrated would be the first thing that I would look at, or their digestion is probably going to be off. One of the things that we have to be very careful of as a naturopath, you cannot make a differential diagnosis. You cannot say you have X condition. Only an MD is legally allowed to say that.
You can't say you have cancer.
You can't say you have arthritis, you have lupus. You can't say any of those things. Now, what you can say is what you see. So you can see whether cells are sticking together or not. Sometimes they're sticking like we see this stack of coins, but sometimes they're just sticking end to end. Now, when you look at the blood, there's a current because you put live blood on the slide. There's a current. The actual fluid is moving, and those cells are carried along by the current. So sometimes they stick end to end, or they stick to a spot on the slide, or they stick to a little piece of debris that's in the slide, and they get this teardrop shape, or they can get a teardrop at both ends, and that's called protein bonding. Again, when we see that, we know that there's something going on with digestion. I'm not going to say you have gastritis, you have acid reflux. They can give me those symptoms, and I can say, well, that may be, it sounds like a gastritis, or the Merck manual gives those symptoms as that, but you're being very careful to not make a differential diagnosis. Now, you can look at the shapes and the sizes as an example. When the blood is free floating, one of the first things we want to look at is the size of the blood. We want the blood to be exactly 7.35 microns. Okay, when it starts to be bigger than that, 8, 9, and 10 microns, we know that a B12 folic acid can be deficient. Now, you can't say they have a B12 deficiency because in traditional medicine, you have to have 30% of all the cells to be these large, what they call macrocytes. They're larger than normal. But you have to have 30% before they call it a condition. Now, you and I as naturopaths, do we want to wait until 30% of somebody's cells are already dysfunctional?
Hell no.
Exactly. I'm going to look, you've got too many. I'm seeing you might even have 5, 6, 10%. Now, it's not a pathology, but I'm saying you're moving in the direction of what's called macrocytes. And macrocytes are just large blood cells. So I'm saying you're moving in the direction. Again, I'm not making a differential diagnosis. Now, when the cells are smaller than that, when they're actually smaller than 7 microns, going down to 6, 5, and even 4 microns, then they're called microcytes. And they're going to be deficient in probably iron and B6. But they're both going to be deficient in oxygen. Almost every condition starts with a deficiency of oxygen. It's either the plasma itself is not holding enough oxygen, or the red blood cells on the surface of the cell are not holding enough oxygen, so they become dysfunctional. Then you can start seeing that the cells become very misshapen. The average cell, red blood cell, lives about 120 days. A white blood cell lives 3 or 4 days. So if you're seeing red blood cells that are now becoming misshapen, there's some that look like, do you remember the World War II movies? And they had those mines that were always in the harbors, and they were big round balls, and they had spikes coming off them. And what would happen if a ship or something touched one of those spikes? The mine would explode. Well, you can actually see those kinds of cells. They're called econocytes. And they're little spiked. They instead of being flat like a life preserver, they puff out at both ends and now become a round ball, and you get these spikes all over them, and they become just like a mine, and they can explode in your blood, in your plasma, in your blood. And then you'll start seeing fragments of blood called schistocytes, where they're pieces of blood cells, or you can see things that were invisible because they were inside the red blood cell, funguses and bacteria and little parasites that are inside the blood cell. Well, when that blood cell ruptures and it explodes, now the contents of that is in your plasma. And again, you can start seeing these things. So you can look at the size, you can look at the shapes, you can look at damaged red blood cells. Then you can see other things. Sometimes there's these big, giant, like crystals. Now, you have to be careful again, because some of the crystals are glass fragments from the slide or the cover slip. Meaning, even though a slide looks perfectly clear, when you're up around 10,000 magnifications, every piece of dust looks like a giant crystal of broken glass.
Yes.
So sometimes, again, people will see this broken glass as a crystal, a bunch of them stuck together.
Like a uric acid.
They're not uric acids. They could be glass from the slide. So you have to be careful what you're looking at. Some are uric acids, carbonic acids, lactic acids, but some are also glass fragments. So that's where the training of the practitioner comes into play.
Yeah,
There's
you're going to say, I think you got glass fragments in your blood. You better see a doctor about that, right?
Right, but they look like cholesterol crystals or uric acid, so they're very similar. So an untrained could actually, by accident, say, oh my God, you have all this stuff in there, and it's not really that, okay? It's really just fragments. So again, that's the education of...
What I like to do is triangulate, find 3 things in the blood that would indicate that a certain problem might be there.
Condition.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I always look for 3 things.
Well, the first things you're going to see is whether it's thick or not, whether the blood is sticky and thick or it's free floating. That's the first thing that's going to become visible. Now, the condition can become a simple rouleau, or when there's what's called RBC aggregation, meaning they're big clumps. It's even beyond rouleau. It's stacks of rouleau stick together until you have this clump of blood. Now remember, I said that red blood cells have to go single file through the capillaries. So when you have these clumps, these are called blood sludge or thick blood, or even the rouleau or protein bonding, the blood doesn't go through the capillaries in single file as well. So you get what's called a brownout. Do you know in electricity, when you get some of these cities that don't have enough electricity, they'll go from section to section of the city, and you might lose electricity for an hour during the day, like during the hot summer? Do you know what I mean by that? And they have a brownout. Yes. Well, in your blood, you can have that, where the tissue is just deficient enough in nutrients and oxygen to become dysfunctional, but not to die. And a lot of people don't realize they have these brownout conditions throughout the body, throughout tissue that doesn't get blood or doesn't get oxygenated very well. That's why in my practice, I'm one of the only ones in the country doing research now for the past 24 months on what's called exercise with very high amounts of oxygen, not just from an oxygen concentrator, but every breath is pure oxygen. And we're doing about 150 liters of air per minute while they're exercising.
If you don't have oxygen in your body, you die, right?
Well, but you don't have to die right away. You could just slow death over 50 years, and you become dysfunctional. Think of every single system. Homeostasis, or what the Anton Béchamp called, and what we now know homeostasis, is where your blood is properly balanced. There's the right nutrients, there's the right amount of oxygen, the garbage is being taken away, everything is working smoothly, you're healthy, you don't get sick. But then the blood starts to get thicker, you're eating more devitalized foods, you get these large proteins in the blood, now you're getting funguses and yeasts in the blood, you can see them, you might have platelets that now stick together, now you get these yeast buds and they have babies and they get these big clumps, and you start seeing all of this stuff in the blood. Now you know that the blood is not moving freely, it's not moving through the system. You're getting where there's a deficient oxygen or nutrient uptake. So now the cells have to decide, what am I going to do? And they're going to either be in this healthy mode, or they're in this I'm sick mode. So imagine when someone's under stress, okay, and think of stress nowadays is probably the biggest killer that there is. And stress causes all of these physiological changes in your blood. But when you're under stress, your brain thinks you're being attacked and you're going to die. So you're going to run. It's like a tiger's going to chase you. And all of a sudden your heart is beating, you're breathing fast. And the reason is you either run away quick or you're lunch. Okay, it makes sense. You were picking berries 100,000 years ago in the forest, having a wonderful day, and it was a beautiful day outside. You come around the corner, there's a tiger right there. What happens? It's not like you have, it's fight or flight. Now, it's not like you have time to warm up. Everybody's exercised. And what's the first 3 minutes of exercise? Warm up. Well, you can't say to the tiger, excuse me, give me a couple minutes to run in place. I got to run from. No, your body goes into overdrive, and every cell in your body instantly constricts or contracts, just like you're pulling your neck down into your head down into your neck, and you're squeezing your butt and your tail. So you go into this defensive mode until finally you get up and you run away and you finally make it and you go, oh, I'm safe. I didn't get eaten. And now all of a sudden your brain relaxes and you're now back into, okay, let's start going back into rebuild mode. Well, most people are in the stress mode so many hours of the day that their cells are all in a state of constant constriction. So they're waiting for the all clear signal to go back to their normal metabolism. And this is why we have the conditions of today. Basically, it's overall slow progression of a snowball rolling down the hill, getting bigger and bigger until pretty soon now the snowball's big enough that if it hits you, you get knocked over, or if it hits your car, you get a big dent in it. So, or there's an avalanche that occurs, and then you really get it. So this is what's happening in the blood. Now, in the dried blood, which is to me, the dried blood is more important for me, but the live blood is more important for the client, because the live blood tells you what's been going on over the last 4 or 5 days. So as an example, when you see a bunch of those real shiny white blood cells, you know, because they're less than 4 days old, you know they've eaten food they're allergic to within the past 4 days. Well, what do? An elimination diet? You do an allergy test diet? You know, you're going to have to find out what foods are causing that immune response. Because you can eat a food, and there are different immunoglobulins in the body. And they call them IgE, IgG, IgM, IgD, IgA. They're different ones. So IgE is tested if someone has hives, or they're allergic to shrimp and their throat swells closed, or, you know, you get pollen and you break out in hives all over. That's called an IgE immunoglobulin. Then you have an IgG, which is totally different. You eat lunch today's lunch, tomorrow morning you wake up with a migraine headache.
What is a protoplast?
Now, a protoplast, that's a piece of debris that you look at when it's in the blood. It could be either a bunch of platelets, or it could be what we would call a nest of bacteria. Depending upon how much bacteria is on it is how shiny it gets. It could be a very dull, just a big piece of something. It almost looks like a wheel sometimes behind it. And in pleomorphism, there's different names for it, but protoplasts and symplasts and these kinds of things. But it's a big piece of debris. Now, you'll look at it, it's probably 5, 6, 7 times the size of a red blood cell.
Looks like a rock. Yeah.
It looks like a rock, so it's going to clog up the blood vessels again. So you can see those. When you start seeing those, you're getting more of real pathology. Someone's coming in and they're sick. When you get someone with full-blown AIDS and you look at their blood, oh my God, it looks like a cesspool. When you get someone that's healthy, that it's amazing. I know, as an example, I've seen 90-year-olds that are super healthy and just heard about live blood. And they wanted to come in and see their blood. And it looked perfect under a microscope. That's why they're 90 years old and super healthy and never get sick. Then you see somebody 27 or 18, for that matter, that's been eating nothing but junk food and Wonder Bread and Wonder Bread sandwiches. To me, it's a wonder how they call it bread. Or they eat nothing but Big Macs and all of the other junk. Well, you look at their blood and it really looks different. And of course, it's not our fault, because how does junk food taste?
Awesome.
Isn't that true? I mean, come on. I'm waiting for the glazed donut diet to come out, where you're supposed to eat 2 glazed donuts 3 times a day with a cup of coffee mocha hazelnut latte. How come they don't have that diet out?
Well,
Okay.
Ask and you shall receive. My wife and I started a juice fast.
Yeah.
We decided to do that, and I was looking at my blood all the time, and it was sticky, it was Rolu, it was, didn't look the healthiest. After a week of doing that juice fast, oh my goodness, it looked
beautiful.
Yeah, it was healthy, it was separated, the blood
Picture
cells were
perfect.
big and fat. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then now there's one thing that we can see. There's a thing, they're very teeny tiny. They're only about 1 micron big, but they're called chylomicrons. Now, this is the big controversy when you deal with pleomorphism or Enderlin work, because they would look at these chylomicrons and say that they're live organisms that change into a different form. Now, we look at those as chylomicrons. Now, there are organelles that resemble chylomicrons that are bacterial forms, L forms and things. But most of those you can tell, because if they go on a 12-hour fast, then there's no more chylomicrons in there, and you can do that blood again and see, they're all gone. Those were fats. They weren't organisms in your blood. Okay, so again, that's where the theory of pleomorphism comes from, monomorphism. Do you believe that it's the germ that causes the disease, or is the terrain that all your cells live in become compromised, so then the cells become compromised and we then succumb to because we're compromised? I go with that theory much more. I am in the terrain theory, the Enderlin's work, where Anton Bichon, where if you don't, it's like a car. If you have a brand new Mercedes, are you going to give it the 69-cent oil that you get from Kmart? Or are you going to buy Castrol top of the line oil for your brand new Mercedes? Which one?
Well, you're going to put the good stuff in, right?
Exactly. You're not going to buy 69-cent, but it's the same thing in your body.
If you want your body to be a Ferrari, eat like a Ferrari.
Exactly. You want your body to be like an old clunker? Well, how many people are passing gas and it's that stinky, smelly? Haven't you ever been behind a car that's pumping out black smoke or blue smoke, and the carburetor's too rich, or it's not rich enough, not enough oxygen in the carburetor, too much? Your body's a simple machine. Everything works the same as a machine. Now, we, the spirit, live in this machine. We're the driver of our machine. But I don't care if you're the top car driver in the world, and you sit behind an old clunker, and you're going to work in the morning, and you hear a new noise or a scrape, and you're going, oh, God, don't break down. I got to make it to work. Please, please. You could be the best driver in the world. It's going to cause a stress response. But have you ever sat in a new car? The plastic in a new car smells good. It's the only plastic that smells good when you sit in a brand new car.
It's got
Would
an
you
aromatic hydrocarbon. Yeah, it's called an aromatic hydrocarbon. That's what the foam is made of.
And it's the only time we go, oh, man, it's a new car. But how do you feel? Even a poor driver sitting in a new car, how are they going to feel? They're going to feel great. So that's the thing. And so what do you do with the blood test? It's not just looking at it. It's actually taking the steps to bring about changes. And I have an expression that Self-knowledge without self-change is self-abuse. So think of that. One gains knowledge but doesn't use that knowledge. They're abusing themselves. So the whole idea is when you get knowledge, it might take just one step at a time, but every long distance starts with one step. And that's the only way you're going to move forward is one step at a time. So you have to take, and easiest thing to do is drink more water, drink more healthy water.
That's as easy as it really is. Number one, stop drinking soda pop. Number two, start drinking water.
I went to the movies this past Sunday with my son-in-law. And by the way, we saw Logan. Oh, my God. Have you seen Logan? That's the latest X-Men.
It'll be in my Cody box soon.
Let me tell you, it is so violent, I would say it's almost dwelling on pornographic. There was no sex, but it was so graphically violent, and there were all these little kids in there, 8, 9, 10 years old. Well, anyway, my son-in-law, I haven't had a soda in, I can't remember how many years. I just never drink soda. So we were sitting, and he ordered a cherry Coke. So he's drinking the soda, and you know how you just pass the soda to your friend and here, take a sip? So he gave it to me, and not without even thinking, I took a sip of the cherry Coke. Well, let me tell you, that was one of the best tasting. I'm telling you, I now know why people drink Coke and cherry Coke and all. It tasted so good, and it was ice cold cherry flavor, and I took a sip. I drank a couple of good gulps, and it was what a memory it had brought back. So it's not fair. Have you ever noticed? I was complaining to God. The last thing I was going, look, I'm teaching nutrition. It's so difficult. Can't you make it simple? Can't you give us something, make it easy? So God spoke to me and says, you want simple? I'll give you simple. If it tastes good, spit it out.
You know what? The best way to look at it is what Satan does is gives you the things you want. So,
oh yeah,
I'm going to make that Coke taste so darn good that you're going to keep on drinking it. Best.
That's it. God gave us the herbs and the plants and the leaves, and Satan gave us Big Macs. And God said, no, don't eat that. Here, I'll give you better tasting fruit. And Satan says, I'll supersize it.
On that note, that's about all the time we have for tonight. Dr. Eliezer Ben Joseph, thank you so much for being on again.
Thank you. Anytime.
Yeah. Plug your website quick.
Yes, naturalsolutionsradio.com every Saturday morning, but all the shows stream on live streaming, and my website is Natural Solutions Radio. We do the show live on the Facebook page, Facebook at Natural Solutions Radio, and it's streamed live. We film it, and it's right there on so we can see it. Natural Solutions Radio, and you can just click the streaming button. And on Facebook, you can ask questions and all of that. Great. Thank you so much.
We will be back again in 2 weeks. This is Chris Kaylor. We are out.